Most people think money is about luck, connections, or hard work. But the Bible never says that. Scripture reveals that wealth is the result of alignment, not ambition. When you operate by God's design, provision becomes a byproduct. This isn't prosperity hype. This is principle. God never told his people to chase money. He told them to seek wisdom, obey his word, and manage what he placed in their hands. And when they did, wealth followed them. Faith is not passive. Faith is applied belief. It's understanding that God operates by systems, and when you plug into the system, results show up every time. The Bible doesn't just teach salvation, it teaches stewardship, multiplication, and dominion. When faith becomes disciplined, obedience becomes consistent, and purpose becomes clear, money responds. This isn't about getting rich, it's about getting aligned, and alignment changes everything. Most people spend their entire lives chasing money, not realizing that money was never designed to be chased. Money responds, it doesn't lead. And the reason so many people stay frustrated is because they've been treating money like the source, when money has never been the source. God is. When you misunderstand the source, you misuse the system. You start waking up every day stressed, anxious, and fearful because your trust is tied to a paycheck, a client, an economy, or a person. And the moment any of those shift, your peace disappears. That's not how God intended you to live. The Bible makes it clear that everything begins with God. He is the creator, the owner, and the supplier. Money is simply a tool that flows through systems he designed. When you put your confidence in money, you limit yourself to what money can do. But when you put your confidence in God, you open yourself up to what God can do. And there is no comparison between the two. Money has limits. God does not. Money can run out. God never does. Here's the mistake many people make. They believe that if they just get more money, their problems will disappear. But money doesn't fix broken thinking. It doesn't heal fear. It doesn't replace wisdom. That's why you can find people with millions who are still stressed, confused, and unfulfilled. They increased income without increasing alignment. God never promised to bless money. He promised to bless obedience, wisdom, and faithfulness. And money is attracted to those things naturally. When you understand that God is the source, your behavior changes. You stop making desperate decisions. You stop compromising your values for quick gain. You stop living in panic mode. Instead, you begin to operate from trust, not lazy trust, but active trust. Trust that says, I will do my part, and I trust God to do his. You show up, you serve, you create value, and you manage well, knowing that provision is not dependent on one stream, one job, or one opportunity. The source determines the supply. If your job is your source, then your income is limited to what that job can pay. If your business is your source, then your peace is tied to the market. But when God is your source, he can use a job, a business, an idea, a relationship, or an opportunity you never saw coming. The channel may change, but the source never does. That's why people who understand this don't panic when one door closes. They know the source is still open. This is also why generosity matters so much. When you believe money is the source, you hold on tightly. You operate from fear. But when you know God is the source, generosity becomes easy. You give not because you're trying to get, but because you trust the system. You understand that God doesn't need your money. He's watching your heart. And a heart that trusts the source is a heart God can safely increase. Wealth built God's way starts here, not with strategies, not with hustle, not with chasing trends, but with alignment. When you align your thinking with truth, your actions begin to follow wisdom. You start asking better questions. How can I serve more people? How can I solve bigger problems? How can I steward what's already in my hands more faithfully? And as you do that, increase becomes a responsibility, not a reward. Faith was never meant to be separated from provision. The same God who provides salvation also provides supply, but he does it his way through his principles in his timing. When you remove God from the equation, money becomes stressful. When you put God back in his rightful place, money becomes manageable. You stop chasing it and it starts responding to you. Because when God is the source, lack loses its power, fear loses its grip, and provision becomes inevitable. Most people misunderstand faith because they were taught to treat it like an emotion instead of a system. They think faith is something you feel when things are going well, or something you hope kicks in when things go wrong. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith is not a mood. Faith is a method. It operates by laws, just like everything else God created. Gravity doesn't care how you feel, and faith doesn't either. When the law is applied, the result follows, every time. The Bible never presents faith as passive. Faith is always connected to action, alignment, and obedience. You don't believe something just by saying you believe it. You believe it by how you move, by what you decide, by what you do consistently. That's why two people can hear the same word, pray the same prayers, and get completely different results. One treats faith like a feeling, the other treats it like a system. One waits, the other works the word. Systems produce predictable outcomes. That's why faith works even when emotions don't cooperate. You can be tired, afraid, or unsure, and still operate in faith if you follow the principles. Faith is simply agreeing with God's way of thinking and acting on it. When God says something, faith responds with obedience, not debate. Feelings ask questions. Faith takes steps. This is where many people get stuck. They're waiting to feel confident before they move. But confidence is a byproduct of movement, not a prerequisite. God has never required certainty. He requires obedience. When you step in alignment with His word, clarity shows up along the way. The system activates when you move, not when you feel ready. Think about it. Sowing and reaping doesn't depend on your emotions. If you plant a seed, it will grow whether you feel inspired or not. Faith works the same way. When you give, serve, plan, and steward according to God's principles, increase follows because the system is functioning. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. A little obedience done regularly outperforms a lot of emotion done occasionally. Faith also requires structure. Random actions don't produce reliable results. That's why wisdom, planning, and discipline are biblical. God is a God of order, not chaos. When your faith lacks structure, your results become inconsistent. But when your faith is organized, when your thinking, habits, and decisions line up with truth, your life starts to stabilize. And stability is the foundation for growth. This is especially important when it comes to provision. Many people pray for financial breakthrough, but operate with financial confusion. They believe God for increase, but ignore stewardship. They ask for abundance but resist discipline. Faith doesn't override responsibility, it empowers it. The system requires both trust and action working together. Faith also teaches you patience. Systems take time. Growth is progressive. Seeds don't become harvests overnight. But when you understand the system, you don't quit too early. You don't panic in the process. You stay consistent because you know what you're doing works even when you can't see it yet. That's real faith. When faith becomes a system, you stop blaming people, circumstances, or the economy. You take ownership. You realize that God has already given you everything you need to succeed within His design. Your job is to apply it, and as you do, results compound. Momentum builds. What used to feel hard becomes natural. Faith done God's way produces peace, not pressure. There's no striving, no desperation, no manipulation, just alignment, obedience, and consistency. And when you live like that, your life becomes proof that God's principles work. Not because you felt spiritual, but because you stayed faithful to the system. Because faith isn't something you feel, it's something you work. Wealth has never been about money first. It has always been about value. Money is just a receipt. It's evidence that value was delivered somewhere to someone in a way that mattered. When people say they want more money, what they're really saying is they want the result without fully understanding the requirement. The Bible never teaches us to pursue riches directly. It teaches us to serve, to solve, to steward, and to multiply. And when you do those things, money shows up as a byproduct. Value creation is God's economic language. From the beginning, God gave humanity an assignment before He ever mentioned provision. Tend the garden. Manage what's here. Improve what's been entrusted to you. Increase flows to those who increase what they touch. That's why complaining never produces abundance, but contribution does. The marketplace doesn't reward need, it rewards usefulness. Many people pray for financial breakthrough, but ignore the question heaven is asking: who are you helping, and how well are you helping them? The size of your income is often connected to the size of the problem you're willing to solve. If your value is small, your compensation will be small, not because God is withholding, but because the system is working exactly as designed. This is where mindset matters. If you see yourself as a consumer, you'll always chase opportunities. But if you see yourself as a creator, opportunities will chase you. Creators think differently. They ask, what do people need? What's broken? What's missing? How can I make this better? And when you answer those questions with excellence, value begins to compound. God rewards diligence, not entitlement. You don't get paid for what you want. You get paid for what you provide. That's why skill development is spiritual. Learning is not optional, it's obedience. When you improve your ability to serve, you expand your capacity to receive. And God often increases your income by increasing your competence first. This also explains why some people stay stuck even though they pray sincerely. Prayer without value creation turns into frustration. Faith doesn't replace effort, it directs it. When faith is active, it pushes you to sharpen your gift, refine your process, and raise your standards. Excellence is not perfection, it's intentional improvement. And excellence attracts compensation. The Bible teaches that your gift will make room for you. Not your wish, not your need, your gift. That means what you bring to the table matters. And when you develop your gift to the point where it genuinely helps people, doors open naturally. You don't have to beg for opportunities when you bring undeniable value. Value creation also shifts how you see work. Work is no longer punishment, it's purpose. Every task becomes an opportunity to serve at a higher level. Every interaction becomes a chance to add value. And when you consistently do that, people trust you, recommend you, and reward you. Trust is a form of value, and trust multiplies income. This principle works in business, careers, ministry, and life. The more people you help win, the more you win. The more you contribute, the more you qualify for increase. God's economy runs on service, not selfishness. And the moment you make it about impact instead of income, income starts following impact. Here's the shift that changes everything. Stop asking how much you can get and start asking how much you can give. Stop focusing on what you're paid and focus on how well you perform. Stop chasing money and start chasing mastery. Mastery creates margin. Margin creates freedom. And freedom allows you to serve at an even higher level. When value becomes your focus, money stops being stressful. You're no longer dependent on luck, trends, or people's opinions. You're anchored in contribution, and contribution is always in demand. The world will always pay for solutions, clarity, and results. Because when you commit to creating real value, provision becomes unavoidable. Increase never starts with abundance. It starts with stewardship. God does not multiply what you neglect, misuse, or disrespect. He multiplies what you manage well. That's why so many people pray for more while mishandling what they already have. They're asking for increase without demonstrating responsibility. But in God's system, responsibility always comes before reward. Stewardship is not about how much you have. It's about how you handle what's in your hands right now. Little is not a season to complain, it's a test to pass. If you can't manage a little with excellence, more will only magnify the dysfunction. Bigger income doesn't fix poor habits, it exposes them. God is too loving to promote you into a position that would destroy you. This is why faith and stewardship cannot be separated. Faith trusts God and stewardship proves it. Anyone can say they believe God for increase, but your management reveals what you really believe. How you handle time, money, relationships, opportunities, and information tells heaven whether you're prepared for expansion. Many people think stewardship is restrictive, but it's actually protective. It keeps you from chaos. It brings clarity to your life. When you steward well, you tell confusion where it's not allowed to live. Order attracts increase. Disorder repels it. God is not attracted to chaos. He's attracted to alignment. This principle shows up everywhere. If you don't manage your schedule, you'll always feel overwhelmed. If you don't manage your finances, money will always feel tight. If you don't manage your thoughts, your emotions will control you. Stewardship is not just financial, it's holistic. God watches how you manage all of it. And here's the part most people miss. Stewardship is preparation for trust. Increase is not a blessing issue, it's a trust issue. God increases those he can trust. Trust with resources, trust with influence, trust with opportunity, trust with impact. When you show God you can be trusted with little, he has no problem giving you more. That's why gratitude matters so much. Grateful people steward better. When you appreciate what you have, you handle it with care. Complaining signals entitlement, and entitlement disqualifies stewardship. You don't manage well what you think you deserve. But when you recognize everything as a gift, excellence becomes natural. Stewardship also requires discipline, not excitement, discipline. You don't steward based on how you feel. You steward based on what's right. That means planning, tracking, organizing, and making intentional decisions. Discipline may feel uncomfortable at first, but it creates freedom over time. And freedom is what most people are really praying for. God never wastes anything, and he doesn't partner with wastefulness. If you leak in one area, increase in another area will only flow out faster. That's why wholeness matters. God wants you stable before he makes you scalable. You don't build higher until you build stronger. Stewardship teaches patience too. You stop rushing the process. You understand that growth is earned, not rushed. You stop comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. You focus on faithfulness, knowing that promotion happens naturally when the foundation is solid. This is why people who steward well sleep better. They're not anxious about money because money has structure. They're not stressed about time because priorities are clear. They're not afraid of increase because they're prepared for it. Stewardship removes fear from provision. And when stewardship becomes your lifestyle, increase stops being a surprise. It becomes a sequence. You handle what's small with excellence. God enlarges your capacity. You manage the increase with wisdom. God expands your influence. It's a rhythm, not a miracle. And it works every time. Because God doesn't multiply what you wish for. He multiplies what you steward well. Obedience is the accelerator most people overlook. They want speed, but they negotiate with instruction. They want results, but they delay response. And delay always costs more than people realize. God doesn't withhold increase to punish disobedience. Disobedience simply slows the system down. When God speaks and you respond quickly, momentum is released. When you hesitate, you introduce friction into the process. Obedience is not about perfection, it's about responsiveness. It's not about understanding everything before you move. It's about trusting enough to take the next step. Many people miss opportunities not because they weren't qualified, but because they were slow. They waited for more confirmation, more clarity, more comfort. But obedience often requires movement before full understanding. That's how faith stays active. Delayed obedience is still disobedience, just dressed up as wisdom. It sounds responsible, but it's rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of what people will think. But fear never produces speed. It produces stagnation. God's instructions are not suggestions. They are pathways. And the moment you step onto the path, progress begins. Acceleration happens when obedience becomes immediate. When God nudges you to forgive, to give, to start, to stop, to shift, and you respond without debate, things begin to line up faster. Doors open sooner. Resources show up unexpectedly. Favor increases. Not because God changed his mind, but because you aligned yourself more quickly with what he already planned. This is why obedience and trust are inseparable. You don't obey what you don't trust. And the more you trust God's character, the faster your obedience becomes. You stop asking, What if this doesn't work? And start saying, if God said it, I'm moving. That mindset removes hesitation, and hesitation is the enemy of momentum. Obedience also sharpens discernment. The more you obey, the clearer you hear. The clearer you hear, the faster you move. It becomes a cycle of alignment and acceleration. But when you ignore instruction, things get noisy. Confusion increases. Decisions feel heavier. Progress feels harder, not because God left, but because alignment was interrupted. Many people pray for open doors while standing still. But doors are easier to recognize when you're already moving. Obedience puts you in motion, and motion creates clarity. God rarely reveals the entire map. He reveals the next step, and the speed at which you take that step determines the speed of the outcome. Obedience also protects you from unnecessary struggle. Some battles last longer than they should because obedience was partial. Some lessons repeat because instructions were ignored. God is efficient. He doesn't waste steps. But when you resist alignment, you extend processes that were meant to be brief. Acceleration doesn't mean ease, it means efficiency. It means you're no longer fighting the system, you're flowing with it. When obedience becomes your default response, life feels lighter, decisions feel simpler, stress decreases, you're no longer forcing results, you're cooperating with design. And here's the truth, most people don't want to hear. The breakthrough you're asking God for may already be waiting on the instruction you haven't followed yet. Not because God is withholding, but because obedience unlocks access. Access to wisdom, access to resources, access to timing. God's timing is perfect, but your response determines how quickly you arrive. Obedience doesn't just speed things up, it multiplies impact. When you move, when God says move, you're not just helping yourself, you're positioning others to be helped through you. Delay doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone connected to your assignment. When obedience becomes immediate, fear loses leverage, confusion loses control, and momentum becomes normal. Because when you obey quickly, God moves swiftly. Money is never the goal, it's the assignment carrier. When people make wealth the destination, they lose direction. But when purpose becomes the focus, money simply becomes the tool that helps you fulfill it. God does not bless people so they can impress others. He increases them so they can influence outcomes. Wealth without purpose drifts. Wealth with purpose moves with intention. Purpose gives money meaning. Without it, money magnifies ego, fear, and insecurity. With it, money amplifies service, impact, and legacy. That's why the same amount of money can destroy one person and empower another. The difference isn't the money, it's the mission. God never intended wealth to be isolated from assignment. Provision follows purpose, not the other way around. When you know why you've been blessed, you handle resources differently. You stop spending emotionally and start investing intentionally. You stop asking how much something costs and start asking what it produces. Purpose reframes every financial decision. It tells money where to go instead of letting money decide for you. This is why people who lack purpose often feel restless, even when they have more than enough. Money can't give direction. It can only fund direction that already exists. Without clarity, wealth creates noise. With clarity, wealth creates momentum. Purpose simplifies decisions because it becomes the filter through which everything passes. Purpose also keeps you grounded as you grow. As increase comes, influence expands. And influence without direction becomes dangerous. Purpose acts as a guardrail. It keeps success from corrupting you and reminds you that what you have is bigger than you. You realize you're not an owner, you're a steward on assignment. This shift changes how you measure success. Success is no longer about accumulation, it's about contribution. It's not about how much you keep, but how effectively you deploy what God has entrusted to you. That perspective removes greed and replaces it with responsibility. And responsibility attracts trust. God entrusts greater resources to those who see money as a means, not a trophy. When God knows that wealth will be used to heal, help, build, and bless, increase becomes safe. Purpose answers the question heaven asks before releasing more, what will this be used for? Purpose also multiplies impact beyond you. When your finances are aligned with your assignment, your increase creates opportunities for others. Jobs are created, needs are met, vision moves forward, money stops being personal and starts becoming generational. Purpose gives wealth longevity. This is how legacy is built. Legacy isn't about how much you leave behind, it's about what continues because you were here. Purpose ensures that wealth outlives you in the form of changed lives, strengthened communities, and sustained impact. Without purpose, money ends when you do. With purpose, it keeps working. When money has direction, it stops controlling you. You're no longer chasing lifestyles, you're building outcomes. You're no longer reacting to pressure, you're responding to calling. Purpose creates discipline, and discipline creates durability. This is why fulfillment increases as purpose deepens. You stop needing external validation because you're internally aligned. Peace replaces pressure. Contentment replaces comparison. You're no longer asking, is this enough? Because you know you're doing what you were created to do. God's design has always been clear. He supplies where there is assignment. He funds what advances his purposes. When your life is aligned with purpose, provision stops being stressful and starts being strategic. Money becomes a servant, not a master. And when wealth serves purpose, impact becomes inevitable.